Orale! Bienvenidos and welcome to the Familia FFB podcast. This is your host, Jorge Martin Familia. We're doing a little bit early tonight because, there's this thing going on, in about a little less than an hour, that whole baseball thing that you guys sometimes hear me talk about on this show. But that World Series is coming up. But you know what? Right now we are live on YouTube. Please give us a like and subscribe, por favor. That'd be really appreciated. Our numbers do continue to grow, but hey, you know what, just don't stop till you get enough, and I'm never going to get enough people watching this show. So por favor, please keep giving us a like and subscribe. And also make sure, another place where you're going to get a great subscription, go to fantasypoints.com. Make sure you use the promo code 22familia10, or if you want to do it in Espanol, 22familia10. You're going to get 10% off the already reduced price. That's 25% off, and you just get some of the best you get. I mean, John Hansen, you got Joe Dolan, Graham Barfield. I mean, gosh, all these friends of the shows, Wes Huber, Scott Barrett, Tom Brawley. I mean, just so many great. And our invitado de lujo is also, you might see him there every once in a while. And so I'm just gonna bring him in right now. I mean, Familia, it's too easy to call him to steal the nickname from that Jake Plummer quarterback and call him Jake the Snake. I'm going to call him Jake the Rake because he rakes in the money on DFS. He's a return guest on this, and he's also a proud member of the Fantasy Points Familia. Earlier this year we talked a little best ball, and I really learned so much, and I actually dived into it. And for the summer, it was probably my favorite way of drafting, and I just had a blast. So my invitado Jake Tribbey, thank you so much. Muchas gracias for that. He has been a writer for Fantasy Points for some time now, and he is already one of their leading DFS analysts during the season. His content really is something that I make sure to take in, especially that early look that he gives at the beginning of the week when you're still kind of getting out of the kind of like the rubble of the weekend before. He's already on top of it with that one. So, I mean, just a great mind. I mean, he's just one of the rising stars in the fantasy community. Joe Dolan has called him his protege for some time, though I don't know if that means that he's going to have to adopt the Phillies as his favorite team and start running up the steps in Philadelphia on the Rocky statue. So I'm just going to give a big bienvenido. Muchas gracias for joining us to our amigo Jake Tribbey. Jake, ¿cómo estás?
Doing well. Really appreciate you having me on, and yeah, I'm excited to talk through all these trades. It's a big time changing landscape in the NFL right now. So it'd be hard to remember who's even on what team, but I'm excited to get some.
It's funny. I was tweeting a little bit about this yesterday, saying that I will take the Major League Baseball trade deadline over the NFL, and also the NBA's trade deadline over the NFL. But the NFL caught up a lot. But I will say the NFL and the NBA win the whole offseason because the NFL wins every offseason because of them there is no offseason. But baseball drags on forever. NBA, it's kind of like everything happens really quick. The draft and free agency is done in like a week, and then it's like everything goes to bed for the summer. But the football, everything is perfect. And I mentioned your content on your DFS content on Fantasy Points. I mean, how has it been treating you so far this year?
Yeah, it's been pretty up and down for me this season, as it always tends to be when you only play large field tournaments like I do. I had a really strong week too. I was all over Tua's 40-point performance, but yes. Unfortunately I didn't double stack him enough with Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, so I'm still chasing a tournament takedown for this season. But yeah, overall the season's been pretty solid so far. Obviously, you kind of need those tournament wins to really make your year. But yeah, still a long way to go, and I'm fairly happy with the way I've played things so far. Obviously, it doesn't help that I tend to get pretty contrarian at quarterback most weeks, and the chalk quarterbacks have just been smashing over and over again. We talked a little bit pre-show about how there are some real power law guys at the quarterback position, especially Josh Allen, but you could throw Jalen Hurts in there, or even Joe Burrow when the Bengals are throwing with 20% over their expectation. So yeah, but I'm going to stick with my strategy of mostly getting contrarian at quarterback, and just chasing volume at wide receiver and tight end. And yeah, that's always led to good results for me in the past. So yeah, always get excited for another week of DFS, no matter how things have been going previously.
No, I hear you on that week 2. I didn't have 2 of that week. I kind of, it felt like for me the first month I was warming up,
Mm-hmm.
and then it was weeks like 5 to 8. I started to make some moves. I started placing in a couple of. I was playing some small GPPs with a lot of other analysts where I know everybody's really, really good. So winning, I won one week. It was 25 people, but I mean, it was just like I knew I knew who I was beating, and so I was just like that almost felt as good as taking down a large sale tournament. I will tell you, I didn't tell you this before the show because I wanted to spring it. The last Sunday night, I did a $10. I think it was like at the 1.2 million tournament. And I was going into the fourth quarter, I was 3 points from first place.
Ooh.
And I had all the same players, except I had Allen in the captain spot. The person who was in first place had Diggs in the captain spot. And I had all the same players except our last player. I had Jake Tribbey, and that person had Josiah DeGuara, and he caught a ball for 1.9.
And that's the difference, right? I mean, like that's the thing. Like Showdown, it really is like you're only a player or two away. I mean, I had when the Dolphins played the Steelers in prime time, I believe that was week 7. I had I had a lineup that was tied for first place in all the single entry contests, and I was winning a pretty good sum of money with a couple minutes left. And then on the final Steelers drive, Pat Freiermuth catches 2 passes, and I went from winning, I think it was 5 or 6K to winning like $40. And yeah, I mean that's just the way Showdown goes, though. And it can be super tilting, which is why I generally prefer playing main slate. But I have made Showdown a priority, and I'm having a pretty decent single game season so far, so I can't be too upset.
Yeah, I got so full of myself because I won all of $30, so it was great, because then a couple other guys. Then I think who was it? Aaron Jones and the kicker kicked something at the end, but then I just played on Monday Night Football and just got my doors knocked in because I thought Joe Mixon was going to be the call, and
I actually ended up having a decent Monday Night Football. I was pretty close to break even despite having 70% Joe Mixon captain exposure across 150 lineups. It was, I guess I nailed every other spot. Like if Mixon had a decent game, I would have done really well. And it was super frustrating. I tweeted out the next day that he had by expected fantasy points, he had the best workload of any player in that game by, I think, 2 or 3 expected fantasy points. And he just continues to underperform. And you could maybe argue that that's just who he is now. He's last in yards after contact per attempt among running backs. The Bengals offensive line isn't great at run blocking, but really, I mean, he looks like he isn't seeing the field very well. And he might just be one of those guys, sort of like how Austin Eckler and Alvin Kamara always exceed their expectation. Joe Mixon might just be a guy who always falls below his expectations. So.
And they just might be a team that just needs to pass the ball, and that's the big thing. Just a big shout out to Albert, one of our regulars. Alberto, ¿cómo estás? Welcome. Thank you for joining us. And I'm gonna give. By the way, any trends that you're seeing that need to be exploited, kind of that you've seen recently that maybe something to be exploited in the near future to rest the season?
Yeah, I mean, we talked a bit about how the most popular quarterbacks do seem to be hitting at a higher rate. That's not something that I would fully bank on being sustained, especially in like the largest field GPPs. I do think it's very worthwhile to get contrarian at quarterback, and if you are going to chase the chalk quarterbacks, I think the way to do that is to really mix up who you're stacking them with. So like those would be some of the bigger trends. Beyond that, I still think the game is kind of largely the same as years past. But yeah, I think people might get a little too ahead of themselves on thinking like, it seems like every week the quarterback who's 15 or 20% owned goes off. That's just not always going to be true. So I think especially if you're playing large field stuff, 50,000 entries or more, it'll definitely still pay to get creative at quarterback.
I think you're right. I mean, unless you've got, oh my goodness, Primo Nicolas, In the house. One of our regulars for a long time, and he was on a couple weeks ago, and then we had some technical difficulties. Primo, much love, Primo. He's number one. Primo, I'm number three. But you know what? It's paying up at the quarterback. You know what? I feel like what's been helping has been seeing some of those rookie running backs to be kind of like economical. Recently, the Kenneth Walkers before he got hurt, Brees Hall. I mean, those guys, Josh Jacobs. I still think I've got paid. I got paid a couple of times with him, and I think Damian Pierce has been a bargain. So I think it's easier to have the power log quarterbacks if you don't feel like you have to pay up for an Austin Eckler. But I've been paying down at tight end. I've just been trying to save money at tight end and hope I catch a touchdown, and gotten lucky a couple times.
Yeah, me and Scott worked together on a big like Millionaire Maker trends article, and the tight ends with the highest ROI in Millionaire Maker were basically those punt tight end options. Guys who were 3K and less who just happened to catch a couple touchdowns, and really push those lineups forward in the tournament. So I'm almost always looking at punting tight end. Unless I'm maybe if I'm stacking Mahomes, obviously playing Kelsey or Mark Andrews with Lamar Jackson. But yeah, I think punting tight end in general is a plus EV move for sure.
Yeah, it's just especially since the receivers have been so good. God, Jamar Chase, get better soon. He got me paid 2 weeks in a row. That was fantastic. His last 2 weeks. But that one and in our fantasy points staff league, no, I don't have him there, but I feel like I have him everywhere else.
Yeah.
But I tell you, it's been the receivers that have been paying up, and those young running backs. So that I know Saquon's starting to get up there as in pricing, and he's up there with the Ecklers and Derrick Henrys. But yeah, I mean, it's been fun. And best ball, when we had you on about I don't know 5-6 months ago, we talked a lot about kind of early drafting and everything. What who's kind of paid off for you there?
Yeah, so I mean, I had my flagship article of the offseason was basically claiming that Christian McCaffrey was the clear 1.01 and that Jonathan Taylor was the number 2 pick. And what's funny is that almost everyone who complained to me about that article said like, oh, you don't understand that McCaffrey is only going to play 3 games this season and that Jonathan Taylor is the most durable running back in football. And we've seen that injuries just aren't predictable. Jonathan Taylor's only played 6 games and is averaging about 11 fantasy points per game because he's been dealing with this nagging ankle injury, while McCaffrey has been perfectly healthy and has been absolutely smashing and looks to be LaDainian Tomlinson 2.0 now that he's in San Francisco. So I think that that's going to prove to be a really strong call. But there were certainly some other hits for me. I was really high on Alvin Kamara. I mean, he was at the bottom when people thought he'd be suspended for the first 6 games of the season. He was going, RB14, RB15. I was pulling the trigger every time because, even if he did get suspended for the first 6 games, it was pretty clear that he was going to be an elite running back for the second half of the season. And that's when, the best ball playoffs and fantasy playoffs are. And, those weeks are just more valuable than the first weeks of the season. And he didn't even end up getting suspended. So I think that's a call that's really going to pay off, especially given his recent usage. Andy Dalton under center. Saquon Barkley is another one. The line of thinking there was pretty similar to Christian McCaffrey. People were scared because of his recent injury history, but we've got the lovely Dr. Edwin Porras on our site staff, and he was very clear that at this point Saquon should be fully past his ACL issues and should be 100%. And we've seen the old Saquon. Amari Cooper has been another good hit. That was really just a bet on talent and the fact that the Browns don't really have anyone else to throw to. And he's been streaky. He's been extremely volatile, like not a player that I'd love it season long, but an amazing pick, it looks like, in best ball. And then my last one is going to be my highest owned quarterback, which is Justin Fields. Unfortunately, I ended up drafting him a lot instead of Tua Tagovailoa, who is probably going to end up being a better pick this year. But Justin Fields is the QB6 over the last month. He's running as well as any quarterback. And as we'll get to later, he just added a new receiver to the mix, which should also help him. But yeah, with his rushing volume, I thought QB16 was just way too low for him. And I think that's going to end up proving to be a pretty good call.
That's the thing. He was one I liked because I always loved that sophomore QB jump. By the way, big shout out to Dame Overboard. ¿Cómo estás? The coolest Dame in town. And yeah, Fields. It was because of the rushing upside. I mean, that I did one of those best ball underdog drafts with Wes, and I just realized that I kept grabbing Ohio State guys, and I said, look, I'm really not trying to shine your apple on this one. I really like these guys, but I told them how much I liked Fields, and it was the rushing upside, and I just kept thinking, and it's kind of playing out the way this season is. He's having a very similar season to Jalen Hurts last year, though his team is not nearly as good. But just the rushing is going so much, and I really, the last couple of weeks there have been some good passes that have made me think, okay, I think he might get there. And you know what, the thing is, it's his first time in a new offense, so maybe there is something that is gonna that there, maybe his sophomore jump actually happens next year, the second year. Yeah, you know what? I ended up doing. I ended up getting. Unfortunately, I got a lot of Davis Mills like as my third quarterback, and I just don't know how that's gonna. I rotated between Davis Mills and Carson Wentz as my third quarterback, and I don't know how those are gonna work out for me. I got a fair amount of Hurts. I'm kind of breaking even. I'm a little bit ahead, but I'd love to see. One thing that I will say that I was very happy about. I got a lot. Whenever Saquon Barkley fell to me in the second round, I was grabbing him, and Dameon Pierce getting him late. I think he's my most owned player this year, and so I think that's gonna pay off for me. And but yeah, I didn't get very much. I think I got Josh Allen in like one team, so. So that one, Josh Allen, and not a lot of Burrow, not a lot of Lamar, I got so much Kyler Murray, and that just
I was big on Kyler as well. Jeff Henderson, who writes for FantasyPoints.com, actually made a case this year that Josh Allen should be a late first round draft pick, mostly just based around his wins above replacement metric. And I mean that looks to be holding true. I think Josh Allen probably should have been a late first, early second round draft pick, and is going to end up being one of the better QB values, even though he was, by far the highest drafted quarterback by ADP at least. So, it's tough when he's averaging 28 fantasy points per game, and you just think like, I can get better value in the later rounds, but I mean, maybe he's just too good. And, it seems to be the case.
That's the thing with him. He's so good. But yeah, it's kind of like, I feel like he has, him, the idea of him in the first round, it's so 10, 12 years ago when, people were doing that. But I think it's for next year. I wouldn't be surprised if we start seeing that, because of the fact that I think there's going to be such a separator, such a big teardrop from, those guys, from him, from Mahomes, from Jalen Hurts and Joe Burrow. I think once you get down from those guys, drop down into the next year, I think it's such a big drop that it is almost like you've got to get your guy early on, and then go from there. Either that, or everybody change your leagues to super flex, so you're justified taking Josh Allen in the first round. But what any misses that have been? I've been torturing myself on Kyler Murray on shows lately, but any misses you've had?
Yeah. Obviously, I mean, I'm kind of right with you there on Kyler. I think my biggest miss ended up being David Montgomery. The running back dead zone guys. I was pretty enamored with Montgomery because he had earned a bell cow workload the last two seasons and had been fairly productive on that. But I think part of my process that was incorrect there was that Khalil Herbert's just really, really good, and his numbers last year would have suggested that. But yeah, I was so sort of locked in on, okay, David Montgomery is going to get an 80% snap share, push for 20 touches a game. And it's looking like closer to a 60-40 split. And I wouldn't be surprised if Herbert was the lead back by the end of the season, because he's pretty clearly the better player. So David Montgomery is going to end up being a pretty big miss for me. And unfortunately, that's a guy that I grabbed instead of someone like Josh Jacobs. And I think in the future, I'm going to be mixing up my running back dead zone exposures a little more, instead of really trying to take a big stand on a guy, unless I have good reason to. A couple other guys, Kyle Pitts, but I think pretty much everyone missed on Kyle Pitts there. It was hard to predict that the Falcons would be throwing 19, 20 times a game. His target share, his route share, it's exactly where you want it to be, but the overall pass volume just isn't there in the offense. Michael Thomas and Kadarius Toney were two guys who I thought were extremely undervalued in best ball, and I think I probably would have been correct there had they gotten a little luckier with injuries. Tony, I'm still holding out hope for, but Thomas, I'm really starting to lose my optimism there, especially with Olave looking like just a world beater at wide receiver. And I'm not ready to call it a miss yet, but I think I'm going to end up missing on Rondale Moore. I was incredibly low on Rondale, mostly just because I thought Cliff Kingsbury is a total donkey and that he wouldn't utilize him in the correct way. But after his usage last week, it does look like Rondale is going to be a pretty dominant slot presence. And yeah, I mean, I think he's going to end up being a low end wide receiver 2, probably the rest of the way until Marquise Brown comes back, and then we'll see. So he might kind of fade away for the fantasy playoffs, which could end up proving me right a little more than maybe I should be. But yeah, curious on your misses too.
Yeah, you know what? Well, it was Murray was one. I really thought Brandon Cooks would be much better than he is, and I mean we'll be talking about him a little bit. And I'm very curious about him going forward because he stayed put, and it's pretty clear that he wants to be on another team. But I almost feel like he's got to play well to have somebody want to take that $18 million contract off their hands. So that's one. Gosh, what were I passed on Derrick Henry a lot. Edwin just kept talking about the fact that he's still got hardware in his foot. And I didn't want any part of that. Just didn't want any part of that in these last few weeks. He's just been a monster. I mean, there's been the injury. Well, I had Jamar Chase as my wide receiver 1, which I think up until he, after, I think he was wide receiver 4 after that big game, his last 2 big games. So I thought he had it within his sights, but that was, man, that one's going to haunt me. But because it's like one of my primos loves to say, "Don't say if in fantasy football," and I'm like, but if he'd stayed healthy, if he'd only stayed.
I mean, it really is hard to beat yourself up over any missed calls related to injury, because a lot of injury stuff, it really is just bad luck. So.
Yeah, and you know what? And one of the ones, bad luck. I mean, it's a big money, my biggest money league, and it's with a bunch of sharks that I used to work with at the Dodgers. So everybody's really sharp, and I mean, it's expert level play. Mm-hmm. And we got the 101 and took Jonathan Taylor, even though I tried to talk my partner into doing CMC, but he said, "No, I want JT." And I'm like, "Okay, he wanted the safety of JT." And I was like, "Okay."
Yeah. I think I imagine a lot of people have kind of learned their lesson on the idea of running back safety. It's non-existent. These guys get into 20 car crashes a game. Like, they're just going to get hurt, or they're not. There's no real way to predict it. It's a tough game for sure.
And I think, to me, one of the things that that I felt good about going into this year was the fact that I kind of avoided the running backs that were coming off the ACL surgeries, the Dobbins, the Edwards, in my redraft leagues, just because Edwin just, told me, he goes, I don't feel good about guys less than 9 months, but really it's 12 to 15 months. And the greatest, and Saquon is playing out. It's the second year that they're better after they've had a normal off season. So I'm kind of adopting that going forward. Though I know he wasn't coming off a surgery because he played in the playoff game, but Henry kind of had the injury scare. But yeah, I think but to me, the other thing is, what made the CMC argument even more sound, and you talked about it in that big article, which I know gazillion people read it during the off season. He didn't have surgery, so that to me is like, you can have a normal off season with no surgery. So that's going to be one of my big indicators, which is why, even though it's hurt this year, JT is not going to be a guy I'm fading next year.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, like a low ankle sprain like he's dealing with, like, it could linger for the rest of this season, but after a full off season, he's going to be 100%, no doubt. And it was sort of a similar thing with McCaffrey. Like, he had dealt with a high ankle sprain, an AC joint sprain. Like, it's not like he tore his ACL or anything. So there was really no reason to expect a significant efficiency reduction, like you would have with someone like Saquon or J.K. Dobbins in their first year the ACL tear. So yeah, I think that's a really sharp take, and I think that's going to be pretty applicable to Breece Hall this year. I think people are probably going to really steam him up over the offseason, and that he may just not be the same super explosive runner that we saw in the first half of 2022.
Yeah, that one's I'm looking at him in 24.
Yeah.
I'm just like, come back, get a good rehab, come back healthy, because he is such a beautiful player. I mean,
Absolutely.
And you know what, Ken Walker, who was Graham Barfield's original, before the draft, he was his number one running back on yards created, and I mean, we're seeing it play out in Seattle. So just, yeah, that's one of the things that I'm seeing a lot for the back half of the season, is those young running backs, Walker, Pierce, Travis Etienne. I think that those are the guys watching them. I'm going to keep an eye on the wide receivers, how they come. But and you mentioned Kadarius Toney. I've still got a candle. I've still got a lighting a veladora that he might figure something out. Guys, when they go to a good situation, they seem to ball out. So.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, he's probably the Chiefs' most talented receiver. I mean, if he's healthy, I don't know if there'd be any doubt about that. So yeah, hopefully we can just get him back on the field, and I'm sure the Chiefs will do a pretty good job getting him the ball in creative ways. So yeah, I'm excited to see him play for Kansas City, but that's the thing, he has to get out there, and we really haven't seen much of that so far this season.
Best ability is availability. So
that's right.
Well, first off, I'm going to take a quick moment, non-football moment, because today is November 2nd, and in Mexican culture, it's the day where we celebrate Dia De Los Muertos. And it's in honor of All Souls Day, the Catholic holiday. And, it's kind of taking a time to reflect on those who have gone before us. It kind of like it was depicted in the movie Coco, by keeping memories of people alive, those loved ones. It keeps their spirits alive in the afterlife. And so this is for my father, Juan, for my sister Bibi, for my abuelitas and my abuelitos who've all gone before, and I could go on and on, but that would take the entire show. Jake, if there's anyone you want to mention, I want you to please feel free, mi amigo. Please feel free. You have the floor.
Yeah. My grandparents in Miami are definitely thinking about you guys, and remembering the good times, and that's what it's all about. So yeah, really appreciate you giving me that moment.
And that's the thing, one of the greatest things that somebody told me when my father passed was just take a fun memory and just keep running that through your mind as much as you can when you get sad. And it really helped. So it was a good time. So Familia, Dia de los Muertos, it's not just about paint, which is a beautiful thing. My kids love it, love the holiday. And let's keep those memories alive. Well, let's get back to football. We were recording this on Wednesday. Yesterday was the NFL trade deadline, Tuesday, and like I said, MLB and NBA are still going to win as far as the most impactful big deals. There were still some significant moves. I kind of want to take a couple moments to talk about some of those, but I want to see if we could discuss each one. Chase Claypool to the Bears, second round pick. I don't want to get into the draft capital. Let's talk just specifically the fantasy implications. Justin Fields now has another weapon. Do you think there's going to be enough passing volume to have him be someone who makes an impact in the second half?
I'm still not very optimistic about the fantasy value of any Bears pass catcher. I was coming around to Darnell Mooney a little bit prior to this trade because he had exceeded 10 expected fantasy points in each of his last 3 games. And it looked like the Bears pass volume was starting to pick up with Justin Fields finding a bit more of a rhythm as a passer. I mean, he still wasn't passing well, but he was much closer to average, whereas before it was pretty poor. But I do think this is just in general a boost for Justin Fields. I mean, throwing to Chase Claypool instead of someone like Velus Jones or Equanimeous St. Brown is a big upgrade objectively. So I'm very optimistic about Justin Fields finishing this year as a quarterback 1, potentially a mid-range QB 1. I think it's the biggest boost for him, and probably an overall boost for the Bears offense. But that certainly hurts Darnell Mooney, and I'm still not optimistic about Claypool's fantasy value overall, just because of target volume concerns.
To me, the one thing that makes me a little somewhat a little bit excited about it is just the fact that he's a year and a half from becoming a free agent. So, and he still hasn't built up the resume to really get a nice payday. Guys really do ball out at this point. So I think he's got that fire within him where to really do everything he needs to do to be great and put up some big numbers. So I think that's one thing that I'm really that has me somewhat excited about this one. So I'm kind of hopeful that's what's got me a little bit hopeful on this one. I still don't think the pass volume is going to be there though. That to me is the big thing. I throwing 20 to 25 times a game. I just think it's not going to be there. And that is just the offensive environment. That's going to be tough. Let's talk about Chase Edmonds to the Broncos. Now he's sharing carries with Melvin Gordon and Latavius Murray. I know he's kind of buried in Miami, but is the arrow pointing up or down for him, or is it neutral?
Yeah, I mean he's almost definitely their most talented running back. So there's some reason for optimism there. I think at least immediately he slides into the Mike Boone role, which was worth and Mike Boone's on IR right now, and that was worth about 7 expected fantasy points per game and 3.7 targets per game. So still not enough to really have like great standalone value unless you're playing in a super, super deep league. Latavius Murray and Gordon are going to get those goal line carries. So I'm not sure there's going to be a ton of TD upside there, but I am still overall a believer in Chase Edmonds' talent. I think he's a pretty decent back. And yeah, there's a chance here that he could carve out a significant role at some point. But I think more likely than not, we're looking at a pretty gross committee the rest of the way.
Yeah, it's so tough to see that. I mean, you said it. You used the perfect adjective, gross. It's just, I think the only thing that has me as slot him in as the top one. You mentioned he's the most talented. I think he's the one who also is the most multi-talented. He can catch the passes. Murray is a 0 when it comes to catching passes. Gordon has been up and down, but he hasn't been catching as many passes of late. So that has me thinking that he could get some work in the passing game if Russ actually passes to him. I mean, I think this comes down. The Broncos may be the biggest disappointment this season. It's just not fun. It's not. I watched that game really closely on Sunday, and it was not fun watching him try and run that offense, and a lot of underthrown balls. It's just, I mean, I'm not as adept in scheme and everything to, when I heard Louis Riddick talking about how it's a JV roster and JV offense, I was like, okay, I'm not going to go there. But yeah, I just knew it wasn't doing much of anything.
Yeah, I mean, if you just look at points per game, they're the second worst offense in the NFL. Worse than Houston, worse than Washington, worse than Tennessee. Like, it's just really bad in Denver. So it's hard to have a lot of optimism there. But yeah, at the very least, Edmonds should secure that pass catching role.
So we got a couple running backs that changed hands. Nyheim Hines went to the Bills. Zach Moss went to the Colts. To me, the big one is Nyheim Hines. Is there enough work for him to be relevant in Buffalo?
Yeah, I think so. So I mean, like, we saw the Bills desperately tried to sign J.D. McKissick, and then he changed his mind. They were involved in the Christian McCaffrey sweepstakes. They spent the second-round pick on James Cook. So like, they're very certain for whatever reason that they need a pass-catching running back in this offense. And Devin Singletary, I mean, he's a solid all-around running back, but he's not the elite tier route runner and pass catching specialist that a guy like Nyheim Hines is. I sort of think that Hines, the ideal outcome here is sort of like a James White in New England type of role where he's playing, every third down, every passing situation, is averaging 7 or so targets per game, and is probably a low to mid range RB2 in that scenario, and that's probably best case. Obviously, he's not going to get the goal line carries. Devin Singletary is still going to lead the backfield in rushing. But I'm very optimistic about Hines, mostly just because of how desperate Buffalo was to try to get a pass catching running back in the building. Like, they obviously have something in mind for Hines. So yeah, I think that there's a lot of potential, and potentially, like 2017, 2018, 2019 James White would sort of be who I'd look at as the, the high end comp.
Yeah, I got a lot of questions on Hines today on the Fantasy Points Discord. And by the way, for you guys, please get in there. You see me and Jake in there all the time, especially on Sunday mornings
Oh
before.
yeah.
Well, Sunday mornings for me, Sunday pregame, pre first game. But yeah, so we're in there answering questions. So a lot of start sit questions are flying through at that point. But Hines definitely is going to get. I almost feel like that move is more for January and February, and then just spend the rest of the season kind of getting him acclimated and kind of unleash him fully in the playoffs. So that's what I'm looking at that one. Moss, I think he's just on the other side of the deal. I think he's just a depth piece in with the Colts. Unless I mean the pecking order, it seems like if JT's out, it starts Deion Jackson. Yeah, do you
Yeah, so
agree?
Deion Jackson, I tweeted this morning. He's only owned in 10% of ESPN leagues, and Jonathan Taylor didn't practice today, and it looks like this ankle. I mean, low ankle sprains don't tend to be a huge issue in terms of a lingering injury, but it's lingering for him, and it could definitely put his week 9 status into doubt. In the two games without Taylor, and where Hines was either immediately knocked out, he had that concussion, or he just missed. Deion Jackson averaged 12.5 carries per game, 7 targets per game, and 20.6 fantasy points per game. I'm not sure that his pass game role will be as good as we saw in those two games where Hines was either out or limited, because the Colts did re-sign Jordan Wilkins to their practice squad. And Wilkins is a guy who's familiar with the offense, and while he never put up big numbers as a receiver when he was with Indianapolis previously, that was because he was always in a sort of a third down role timeshare with Naheem Hines. So I think Jordan Wilkins is going to steal some pass game work if Jonathan Taylor is inactive. But Deion Jackson looks like a really strong handcuff for the rest of the way. Maybe not quite like Kareem Hunt levels, but probably the next tier down. And he's a really good player. I mean, we saw a couple weeks ago he had it was 12 carries, I think 10 receptions, and 150 or so yards from scrimmage and 28 fantasy points. Like he's certainly capable of big games, and he looks like a pretty talented rusher. So yeah, if you have an extra bench spot and you're looking for a handcuff rusher, I think Deion Jackson makes a ton of sense in any sort of redraft league.
Yeah, very much, especially if you got Jonathan Taylor, and even if you don't have Jonathan Taylor, I mean, he's a good player to have because just the fact that he's he is good, but there. Yeah, I am kind of shocked I mean, the leagues that I play in, Deion Jackson's scooped up all over the place. So
Yeah,
I think I play in those 10% of leagues. So I think we both do.
yeah.
So he's gone on those. Let's another one. TJ Hawkinson to the Vikings. The not too often in intra division trade. He goes from number 2. I think he goes from the number 2 target in Detroit to possibly the number 3 in Minnesota. How are you kind of looking at him, especially considering that tight end is such a wasteland again this year?
Yeah, I'm viewing this as a slight downgrade, potentially a lateral move, but I think lateral move is probably closer to the best case here. I really just don't see him as much more than the Irv Smith replacement. And Irv Smith
Yeah.
was averaging 7.8 expected fantasy points per game prior to his high ankle sprain, which is a 28% worse workload than what Hawkinson's usage was in Detroit. So I really don't think Minnesota intends to work their offense around TJ Hawkinson by any means. I mean, we know who their alpha pass catchers are. They're really just in win now mode. They're 6-1. They're a serious NFC competitor, and yeah, they needed to fill in for Irv Smith. I don't think they wanted to trot out Johnny Munt for 80 snaps, 80% of snaps. So yeah, I think it's basically just a replacement for Irv Smith, which probably makes it a slight downgrade for Hawkinson's fantasy value overall.
Yeah, I just think I mean, both teams are throwing quite a bit. I feel like the Rams, the Lions might be throwing a little bit more than the Vikings, but yeah, I just don't. I don't see Hawkinson's value going up. I mean, you mentioned Justin Jefferson, he's getting his 10 to 15 targets every week. You got Adam Thielen, and how much is left over after that? I don't think there's that much. And speaking of trying to work with leftovers, Jeff Wilson going to Miami. Is Raheem Mostert is he insurance, or is Mostert going to leave him any leftovers?
Yeah, so I'd imagine this is probably going to be a 70-30 split in Mostert's favor. So that's not enough for Wilson to really have any standalone value, but he's, high-end handcuffed now if Mostert gets hurt. Probably pretty similar to Deion Jackson overall. I mean, he really didn't have any path towards playing time in San Francisco, especially after they added McCaffrey. So I think, this is a slight boost for Wilson's fantasy value overall, but he's really not going to get there for you unless Mostert goes down. But, all things considered, Mostert is one of the more injury-prone running backs in the NFL. So, it's no guarantee that he stays healthy.
Yeah, that to me is a big thing. 30-year-old running back, you're just looking at a guy that you don't want to call it a ticking time bomb, but he hasn't shown Edwin talks about injury history, and he's got injury history. So you just got to have that protection, and that's why Jeff Wilson has to be kept on rosters. My primo Nico, he called me on Sunday morning. What do I do with Jeff Wilson? I said, no, he's dead. There's nowhere to pick him. You need to pick him back up, primo. Pick him back up. Last one, Calvin Ridley to the Jaguars. I think that's a sneaky good deal for the Jaguars. I know amigo Graham Barfield, big Jags fan. I know he was pretty pumped when that one came out.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a great deal for the Jaguars. The Jaguars have a receiving core right now that's kind of just full of complementary pieces. I mean, they gave Christian Kirk and Zay Jones quite a bit of money, and those guys are really good in the a number 2 or number 3 role, but I don't think you can consider either of them like an alpha type wide receiver 1 like Calvin Ridley is. So this is going to be a really good group of receivers for Trevor Lawrence in 2023, and I think the Jags got a lot better from this trade. So I'm pretty excited about it too.
Yeah, I'm excited about that one. Hopefully Trevor Lawrence takes some steps forward, because we need more quarterbacks. I'm not liking what I'm seeing in Tampa Bay and Green Bay, and I don't like the possibility of the even the thought of them walking away with nobody coming in behind them. So that's we'll see how that one is. And a couple of notable non-moves: Brandon Cooks and Cam Akers stay put. The Packers stand pat. Any of those really stick out to you? I mean, we'll be talking about Cooks in a few minutes. We can focus.
Yeah,
on
I mean,
Akers.
I can't believe that the Packers didn't try to make a move for a wide receiver. Like their offense has just been terrible. Aaron Rodgers has zero fantasy upside without Devontae. It looks like. I mean, Aaron Jones is their best receiver right now. I mean, Romeo Doubs is coming on, and I think he may end up being a pretty good player, but it's not enough right now. And I mean, after him, it's pretty barren. So yeah, I was shocked that the Packers didn't make a move for a wide receiver. And honestly, I was pretty surprised that Kareem Hunt didn't get traded as well.
Yeah.
On the Monday night game, it looked like he had gotten benched and was pretty upset. And me, I was on a call with some of my friends, and we were all saying like, oh, he must have gotten traded. Like we were ready for the news to come out. I actually had a really good showdown lineup that was about a point away from winning, and had Kareem Hunt, and obviously that didn't end up working out. But I was really surprised that he didn't get traded, and I'm just kind of wondering what happened there with that benching. It's kind of just a really, really confusing situation overall.
I so had him pegged to come to the Rams. So I don't know if maybe the Rams said you got to take Cam Akers away from us. The Akers thing is it's just going to be a distraction for the rest of the season. There's going to be, and I think they may come to a point where they need to release him, because I don't know I really don't know if he's going to play another down for the Rams.
Yeah. And I mean, like, just in general, it's hard to have a lot of optimism for anyone in that backfield. Like, they're the least productive backfield in fantasy. The offensive line looks terrible. So I can't exactly blame Akers for wanting to play somewhere else. Ronnie Rivers led the backfield in touches last week. It's a very bad backfield situation in Los Angeles. And you'd have to imagine that they'd rather have Akers out there than, somebody like Ronnie Rivers or Malcolm Brown. But Yeah, it was definitely surprising to see him not get moved.
I had to look up and make sure that Ronnie Rivers there was a running back several years, probably more than 10 years ago. I had to make sure he wasn't like, Frank doing the Frank Gore thing and playing when he's like 37 or something like that. So,
yeah, well, that was, I mean, in the fantasy points Discord, Scott Barrett let everyone know that, Ronnie Rivers was going to get 60 to 80% of Rams backfield carries before anyone had that info. I actually bet Ronnie Rivers to score a touchdown and got great odds. He didn't end up scoring, but it was something I felt really good about after I saw the backfield usage there. So yeah, another reason to be in the fantasy points Discord.
Yeah, even though I told somebody not to play Malik Davis and he scored a touchdown on Sunday. So I'm sorry for that. If you're watching out there, I'm sorry. Lo siento mucho. So it was Tony Pollard day. So I want to get into a couple of news items, the cheese mess section. So we already talked about Jonathan Taylor. So the lingering effects of the ankle injury. So I don't think we need to go into that anymore. But Cordarrelle Patterson returns to practice. Your neck of the woods. You're down in Georgia now. Looking at this possibility, how much more muddy does that make this backfield with Tyler Algier and Caleb Huntley?
Yeah, it's tough. CPAT only had 1 week where he had an elite workload, and that was week 1. And then after that, it kind of turned into a bit more of a committee. And I think, the other running backs were playing well enough that I just don't think that they're going to hand CPAT this bell cow workload when he comes back. So yeah, it probably remains a gross committee. I mean, Patterson still has the most standalone fantasy value in that backfield. He's a really talented player and is going to run some routes at receiver and, catch more passes than anyone else. But yeah, I'm not super optimistic for anyone there.
Yeah, that one's going to be tough. So, and Chuba Hubbard still in kind of rehab stage. I was excited to fire up Foreman last week because I felt like he was going to run unopposed. I think he's running unopposed again. Tougher matchup this week, but I think we saw what he had last week. I don't think he's going to reach those heights again. Definitely not with the 3 touchdowns, but I think there's something to see there, something to play with there in your lineups at the very least in a flex spot. What do you think?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, he's definitely a viable starter at this point, as long as Hubbard is out. Hayden Winks actually had a great chart where he posted the backfield usage, and it was Hubbard working as the 1A in week 7 for the most part until they got into extreme positive game script. So if Hubbard manages to play this week, I think he practiced in a limited fashion today, but I know he looks extremely questionable for week 9. So if he manages to play, Foreman's, I don't think he can be considered in play, although, he did have a really strong game last week. But, you got to keep in mind that most coaches typically abide by the rule that you don't lose your job, because you get hurt. So I think Hubbard's going to come back in, and this is going to be pretty close to a 50-50 split, and he's probably going to get a little more pass game work than Foreman. But yeah, if he sits, Foreman looks like a pretty solid running back play, probably like a high end RB2 type guy for the rest of the way.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think at least until Hubbard comes back, I think there will be a kind of a split there, and I think that's going to eat into his carries. He's not going to have very much of a bell cow role. And then the last one, I think it's very interesting that this morning, and it's Daniel Snyder apparently is exploring selling the Commanders, and then the news item comes out later that the federal government kind of opened up a criminal investigation into financial improprieties for the team. Big coincidence. Big coincidence. I think not. It's I'm gonna share a little bit. I worked, as you all know, I worked for the Dodgers. I also worked during the Frank McCourt era when they were sold the team, and Major League Baseball put the screws to him to make sure that he sold the team. I mean, everything was public. I mean, they were making also, they put the team into bankruptcy, and we're not giving them any there were no lifesavers to get them to keep the team. And I think what's happening here is kind of like behind the scenes. I think there are enough owners that have just kind of said, okay, we're keeping this quiet, but he needs to sell. He can't keep the team. And I think with, when you get the federal government involved, I think there's so many owners that don't want the federal and government poking around into their teams. So it's a rough one, man. rough one for Washington fans.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the good news is, at least with the federal investigation, it seems certainly more likely that he's going to get pushed out. And obviously they are looking into selling the team. So I imagine other owners are going to really start putting the heat on him to just get out of there. And yeah, I think that'll probably make the NFL a better place for just about everyone.
I think if you could get that team to be, behaving like a flagship organization, which they really were before Snyder bought the team. I mean, I grew up in the 70s and 80s watching the and into the 90s where Washington, I won't use their previous name, but Washington was a dominant organization, well-run organization, going toe-to-toe with the Cowboys, and I think the NFL wants that to happen. I mean, gosh, they're throwing a number out there like $5.6 billion as a sale price for that, which is just that's a that's a lot of tacos, man. That's a lot of tacos.
Yeah.
So we'll see. This one's going to be a novela that plays out for a long time. So we got our weekly novela, Adentro Afuera, who's in, who's out, for week 9. And some of these guys are obvious plays, but they're the players who that I put on here that are in, I think are kind of like looking at some smash spots, and the ones that I'm out afuera are players that I don't love their matchup. And the start one, and you mentioned this one in your early look for DFS, Justin Herbert. Now, we didn't talk about the Keenan Allen injury because I saved it for this one. You got Keenan Allen, who's not looking good to play this week after it seems like he had a setback during the week off. I know he's 7,200 on DraftKings. How are you feeling about Herbert, knowing that Allen, and we already know Mike Williams is out?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's tough to love Herbert without his top 2 wide receiver options, but we know he's an extreme talent, and like really the spot to love here is the matchup. Atlanta is one of the premier pass funnels in the NFL, allowing the second highest pass rate over expectation. They're also allowing the second most schedule adjusted fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. They rank dead last in PFF pass rush grades, 6th worst in PFF coverage grades. This is just an outstanding matchup for any passing offense. I mean, even if, we know at this point, Herbert's wide receivers are going to be Josh Palmer, Michael Bandy, and DeAndre Carter. Even with that, rather subpar receiving core, you can pretty easily see Justin Herbert going for 30 DraftKings points in this contest. I mean, PJ Walker absolutely destroyed Atlanta last week, and we saw Joe Burrow do it the week before. This is a defense to target, and I think people might be a little scared off Herbert for DFS purposes because he's missing his top 2 wide receivers. But if there's ever a spot for a blow up game for Herbert, it would be here. So yeah, I'm definitely still going to play him, and I'm optimistic he'll clock in around 5% ownership this week.
Could it be? It's interesting because he's gotten so many targets. Austin Eckler has been getting double-digit targets recently. Could that be an interesting stack? I mean, I know you're paying up for Eckler, but is that the potential for an interesting stack? I think he's in the 8,000s or something for this week.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, people don't want to stack running backs with quarterbacks, and for good reason. Oftentimes those players are negatively correlated, but at least over their last 22 games together, Austin Eckler and Justin Herbert actually have a 0.01 positive correlation. So you're not really giving up like any upside, so to speak, playing those 2 guys together, and it'll be a pretty unpopular pairing, I would imagine overall. Eckler is going to be super popular this week, but like I said, I don't think a ton of people will be on Herbert, and probably no one's going to play that combo. So yeah, that's a good way to get unique there. Herbert plus Eckler plus one of Palmer, Everett, maybe DeAndre Carter, even Michael Bandy. I think that's pretty viable.
And you had the stat in your early look where Herbert, I believe, has averaged 27.7 fantasy points in his victories, and obviously they're favored in this game. Granted, they're road favorites, but they're still favorites. And I think you said that was the same exact number that Lamar Jackson averaged in his breakout MVP season in 2019. So that's who you're getting when they win.
Yeah. Herbert's been, historically super dominant in wins. Maybe you could argue that his upside isn't the same without, Mike Williams and Keenan Allen in the lineup. But I mean, we know he's a tremendous talent, and like I said, like the matchup is just outstanding. So yeah,
sweet.
with the Chargers favored, I'm still willing to pull the trigger on Herbert here in the plus matchup.
Oh, that's Mexican. That's Mexican sweetbread. That is so sweet, so tasty, so tasty. Another guy who has a tasty matchup, Miles Sanders, going to Houston. He had only 9 carries last week, but his previous 5 games was 20, 16, 29, 17, and 19 touches. And I mean, this is a Houston defense that just got run over by Derrick Henry and Josh Jacobs the week before. Their rushing yards against is ridiculous. I mean, how do you not? How can you not put Sanders as a smash play this week?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard not to. Like the matchup is incredible. Houston's sort of like the opposite of Atlanta in that they're, a premier run funnel. Teams love running on Houston. And, I think another important note here is that Jalen Hurts has been incredibly dominant in the first half of games, but the Eagles have been blowing everyone out, and he's just taking his foot off the gas completely in the second half of games, which could really open the door for someone like Sanders to, get to 25 touches. I had a stat last week. I'll need to update it, but 81% of Jalen Hurts fantasy scoring has come in the first half of games. So unless you think, Houston is going to keep this game close, I think you really want to target the Philadelphia running backs. And obviously that kind of starts and ends with Miles Sanders.
That's amazing. Joe Dolan was kind of talking a little bit about that, how Philly fans are going crazy over the fact that the Eagles aren't piling on. So I guess they can't have nice things in
well, I mean, that only really helps in like college football, right? Like there's no advantage in the NFL to beating every team by 40. You got to protect that franchise asset, Jalen Hurts. So
absolutely,
I think that translates to a lot of carries for Miles Sanders.
Yeah, they'll want to turn him loose in January. So January, February.
Yeah.
So
the 40-point fantasy games will be plentiful in the playoffs, I'm sure.
Oh yeah, that we'll be playing some definitely some showdowns and everything on the weekend. This one I'm a little worried about it, but gosh, I mean it's such a Romeo Doubs at Detroit. The Lions have just been 276 passing yards per game. Again, it looks like Dobbs is going to have nobody else in. I actually played him on that lineup that almost won some coin over the weekend because I looked at him and I said he's the only game in town. It's him and Tanyan, and this one's a little trepidation, but I just think there's going to be target. The volume is going to be there for him.
Yeah, for sure. I think for DFS purposes, everyone's going to drift towards Aaron Jones and maybe a little bit of AJ Dillon. But this game has a 50 over under. Last I checked, one of the best one of the highest of the week. And yeah, Dobbs is kind of the only guy there. So when the Packers throw, it'll probably end up going to him and Tunyon. And it's hard to argue against the Detroit defense that it's just been absolutely abysmal. I believe they fired their defensive backs coach on Tuesday. So yeah, it's looking pretty bad there. One guy that I wanted to mention for DFS, he's the minimum price, and I think could be pretty interesting if Christian Watson doesn't clear concussion protocol, is Samori Toure. Actually had the second most expected fantasy points among Packers wide receivers in week 8. And, not a guy I'm going to be playing in one-offs, but if you're, making Jared Goff stacks or making Aaron Rodgers stacks, he's worth a look at 3,000. So just figured I'd throw his name in there. I don't think he's the best wide receiver punt of the week by any means, but he's certainly a little interesting. And, you just got to keep an eye on the health of those other Packers wide receivers.
He's the one because he caught that late touchdown in the fourth quarter. The winning team, the team I was trailing or did not have Torrey, and that one was that Torrey won that person. Actually, several people shared that one because a lot of people had. I think it was like 6 people had that one, but it was a nice little chunk of change on Sunday night. Just splurge on Halloween. So next one, Zach Ertz, my tight end. Zach Ertz going against that Seattle defense. That's just, I mean, I feel like in this one, I'm targeting in tight end whoever's playing Seattle on this show on a weekly basis. He took them for 7 catches for 70 yards in week 6. I mean, to me, the big stat is that the Seattle Seahawks are giving up 80.9 receiving yards to the tight end position, which is almost 10 more than the number 31 team. Man, Zach Ertz, I think even with D-Hop, is he a strong play for you?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Seattle ranks as the best schedule adjusted matchup for opposing tight ends. And Ertz is seeing great volume. He's tight end 3 by expected fantasy points per game, tight end 4 by targets per game. So yeah, I mean, it's really just a bet on volume against a terrible defense. Really can't hate it too much there. I think there's a decent argument there that maybe he doesn't have much upside because he's never been a great yards after the catch guy, and he's getting older. But at the same time, I mean, the volume's really strong, and yeah, the matchup's great. So it's hard not to like.
Oh, really good matchup. So some tough matchups coming up. PJ Walker, we're going to the Afuera section. The quarterback on there, I mean, that throw was so beautiful, but man, he's got a tough matchup. Even with the Cincinnati losing Awuzie, I hope I said that correctly, to a torn ACL. Please rehab well, my man. Please hope you got a good doctor like Edwin to take care of you on the PT side. But that secondary is still giving up just 219 yards. It's going to be a collective effort, and it's a road game for Walker. I'm not loving this one for him this week.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of tough for me because PJ Walker he's been playing out of his mind the last couple weeks. I mean, he had that throw last week was one of the greatest throws in NFL history. He's one of PFF's, I think, the 8th or 9th highest graded quarterback over the last couple weeks. He's just playing really well, and I mean, I could see it continuing against Cincinnati, but you have to remember that this is PJ Walker. Like, this is a guy who is going to be on the practice squad had Sam Darnold and Baker Mayfield both ended up healthy this season. So it's hard not to expect him to come back down to earth at least a little bit. But I wouldn't be shocked if he had another pretty decent game just because he's been running so hot lately.
I could be. I don't know. To me, the one thing that could help them is the fact that they lost their top cornerback, that the Bengals lost their top cornerback. And I know that puts Eli Apple more into the spotlight, who I think he's still got tire marks on him for that because Cooper Kupp just ran all over him in the Super Bowl. But yeah, that one's a tough one. Now speaking of running, James Robinson and Michael Carter, I think they're going to have a tough time against Buffalo. I mean, I know it's a home game for them, but I mean, they've lost, Elijah Vera Tucker, who my friends, their son played offensive line with him in high school. But the Bills have just been, other than the game that Aaron Jones who's been playing out of his mind and ran for 143 yards. Before that, they hadn't allowed more than 54 yards to any running back. And I'm just looking at this one. It's tough road to hoe, I think, for both of them this week.
Yeah, absolutely. The Bills are the 5th toughest matchup for opposing running backs by schedule adjusted fantasy points per game. They've allowed the 3rd fewest yards after contact and the 5th lowest yards per carry on the season. I really don't have any hope at all for James Robinson. I've slightly more optimism for Michael Carter because he has a better workload overall thanks to the target volume that he gets. The Bills don't allow much down the field, so maybe that's another argument in Carter's favor that Wilson would be forced to check down a little more. But yeah, it's an absolutely brutal matchup against this Buffalo defense, and it's hard to see New York, being able to get anything done offensively. So yeah, I think you're spot on there.
Yeah, and I think interdivision. I think those teams, they get a little bit more keyed up on those games, and I think that and I think the Bills, they got a little embarrassed last week that the game was closer than they probably thought it should have been. I think they're not going to leave any doubt, and plus I think that they're going to be able to get enough of a lead that the Jets aren't just going to be able to. The Jets are going to have to go to their passing game, which hasn't been good results with Zach Wilson lately. So, and speaking of results, I'm kind of Brandon Cooks going to Philadelphia on Thursday Night Football. It's just it does not look good for him. It almost looks as bad for him as it did for that fastball that went into Bryce Harper last night that he put out about 450 feet into the right field bleachers last night. Darius Slay is lurking for him. And there's no Nico Collins this week, or possibly no Nico Collins. But to me, the curious part is he's only got 7 targets he's gotten no more than 7 targets in any game since week 2. And I'm starting to wonder if it's like something with something going on with Cooks. Maybe he's taken lost a step, or if is Davis Mills just not good, and as good as so many of us thought he was going to be, like me and Best.
Yeah. Yeah, Davis Mills, I mean, part of the problem there is that Davis Mills isn't pushing the ball downfield. He is one of the lowest average depth of targets of any starting quarterback. And I think another big part of it is that defenses are very key on, Brandon Cooks being a wide receiver 1 in Houston. Nico Collins had actually outproduced Cooks in their last, I think, 3 or 4 healthy games together. So, Collins kind of ended up being a guy that I was targeting a bit more in DFS. I think, at least specifically as it applies to the Thursday night showdown slate, I'll be looking at a guy like Chris Moore or even Philip Dorsett a bit more than I will Brandon Cooks. He's entering this game questionable. He's not thrilled with the franchise overall. It seems like a pretty easy fade to me here against a Philadelphia secondary that's been really tough, especially on the outside.
Yeah, I saw somebody. I was listening to someone earlier who looked ahead at all the lines going the rest of the season. The Eagles are favorite in every game going forward this season. So that's just
they're the runaway favorite to win the NFC, and they've got really strong Super Bowl odds. I believe they're second, like plus 500, plus 550, behind only Buffalo. I think, you could argue maybe if they were in the AFC, that would be a slightly different story, but they're in the much weaker conference and they look like, just world beaters offensively. So, it's pretty incredible how much public sentiment swung on Philadelphia from being like a league average team to being one of the best teams in the NFL in the span of like a month is awesome.
I think it was just a great bit of roster construction. I think somebody was talking about how Howie Roseman isn't the greatest when it comes to drafting, but when it comes to building a team and using that draft pick to trade for AJ Brown, I think was just brilliant. And just building around the guy. I had somebody on recently, former Major League Baseball player Jerry Hairston Jr., and he just said he's a huge Bear fan. So when he's looking at what's happening with Justin Fields, he just looks at what's happened in Philadelphia, and he just said, build that wall in front of the kid and get him playmakers. So we're gonna see how that works out. Last one, TJ Hawkinson. Familia, thank you for staying with us on this one. TJ Hawkinson at Washington. Not loving this one. I don't know how much of the offense he's going to pick up, but he's going to be thrown in because there's no Irv Smith. But the Commanders are number 1 versus the tight end, giving up just 28.2 yards a game to the position. Hawkinson already got held to 26 yards earlier this season in a game that saw 63 total points. Detroit 36, Washington 27. But the Commanders are shutting down tight ends this year. They're the opposite of Seattle.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely a tough matchup for Hawkinson. And like you said, it's kind of a short week for him. It's questionable how much of the playbook he'll even be able to pick up. And as we mentioned earlier, it's probably a lateral move at best in terms of workload, and potentially a 20 to 30% downgrade for Hawkinson. Washington has been third worst against outside wide receivers per schedule adjusted fantasy points per game allowed. So I think the guys that you're really going to want to target here are Justin Jefferson. Obviously, that's sort of an every game thing, but KJ Osborne too, I think is a very interesting play, at least for DFS tournaments. I'll be targeting some Kirk Cousins stacks. So I think it makes sense to go more that direction than towards a guy like Hawkinson.
Yeah, I think Osborne, he's going to be in like the 5,000 range or like high 4,000s, right?
I believe so. I haven't checked his price, but he should be pretty affordable. So yeah, if you're looking to double stack Cousins, most people will probably go towards Thielen, but I think Thielen has lost a bit of a step. He's dealing with a knee bruise right now. he's probably not very live to hit any of the yardage bonuses on DraftKings. Like he's a guy who can really only get there through, like a multi-touchdown game. So I think I prefer Osborne as the, sort of the secondary stacking partner with Cousins as opposed to, Thielen or obviously Hawkinson, like we talked about.
Yeah, the guy who could get those deep shots. So yeah. Speaking of double stacks, yes, Tua, Hill, and Waddle. Everybody just build one lineup with those three guys in it every week, no matter what the cost is. No matter.
Yeah, Scott mentioned in XSP, and I had some notes in the DFS study hall article that I'm currently working on, that Tyreek Hill's workload this season is easily the best he's ever had. He has more 12 target games than any player in the NFL. He's looking like potentially this year's Cooper Kupp. Like his volume is truly elite, and Tua's doing a great job at getting him the ball in space. So Tyreek Hill is a guy that I think is still underpriced and should probably be closer to the Cooper Kupp price that we saw last year of like 97, 9,800. He's still 1,300, 1,400 away on DraftKings. So Hill's a guy that I'm just going to target every week and just hope that his ownership isn't 30%, which it may be, but I'll still eat the chalk because no one else can score 60 points.
I'm so happy that I grabbed him this year, because he just was. People were fading him, thinking the downgrade in the quarterback, but man, they were just going to spend some money. I knew they weren't going to spend that money not to just have him be, a little ornament there. No, he was going to be used.
Part of the argument there too was that like Jalen Waddle was going to be, it's like a 1A, 1B type situation. And I think it's clear at this point that that's not the case at all. I mean, Hill is the guy in that offense. He leads the league in first read target share, which is a really cool fantasy points data stat that I have access to now. And that, everyone will have access to very soon on fantasypoints.com. But yeah, when he's getting targeted on like 40% of Miami's plays as the first read, it's just absolutely absurd volume for a guy who's arguably the most talented wide receiver in the NFL. So yeah, Hill ended up being like a great best ball pick for anyone who grabbed him at like wide receiver 8, wide receiver 9. Really great value there.
He's so fun. He's so fun to watch. And quick hola to amigo Joey. Joey, I gotta buy your shirt, your Ohio shirt. So I gotta get that one. And we got a question in the chat. Brian Dodson asking PPR flex, Cooks, Dillon, or Hines this week. Ooh.
Oh man, that's a tough one. I would lean towards Cooks. I'd imagine Cooks projects the best out of that group,
especially being PPR.
Yeah, it's tough because Aaron Jones has really been dominating backfield usage lately, and it's you really have no idea what Hines' role is going to be in this first week in the new offense. So in any type of season-long format, I generally just lean towards safety, and that almost always means playing your highest projected player, who I think in this instance would probably be Brandon Cooks, as gross as it is.
Yeah, it's a tough one. Well, that's when you got 6 teams on bye. These are the kind of lineups that we're looking at. That's what we're looking at. Oh my goodness. Well, mi amigo, time to close up shop, but I got one fun one for you. I know you relocated down to the great state of Georgia. And have you been able to find good Mexican food there?
Yeah. We actually found a pretty solid restaurant called Monterey, which is it's got they've got great fajitas, great Mexican food, solid margaritas and stuff. So definitely glad that we found a great Mexican restaurant. And the best part about any Mexican restaurant is that you get awesome food and a ton of it for like pretty cheap, and their prices are super reasonable. So me and my girlfriend probably go there every couple weeks. It's a good time.
Oh man. Oh yeah. Oh, Dame Overboard. She's flexing right now. Yes, I do have to buy the shirt because yes, we're playing in the FC Eliminator, and I've already been eliminated, so I'm not getting that one. So not gonna backfire. You're gonna win, and I'm gonna keep jumping up from the 27th spot in overall in Scott Fishbowl. So I was up to number 7, big guy. So that was good. But everybody took a little bit of a dump last week. So Josh Allen's going to carry me to another big game this week. So hopefully, okay. So you teased a little bit stuff you're working on. Obviously, you got the weekly articles. What you got going on as we close up shop? And please point everybody to where they can find your stuff.
Yeah. So you can get all my content on fantasypoints.com. I do 4 articles a week over there. So yeah, you can find all my stuff there, and then follow me on Twitter at Jake Tribbey. I tweet out my article links, all the interesting stats that I find during the week. Even if you aren't a Fantasy Points subscriber, I'm sure you can gain a little value by following me, because I tweet out a lot of stuff that ends up behind the paywall. But throw it up on my Twitter, because I want to share with everyone. And but yeah, fantasypoints.com is the main spot to go.
Oh yeah, Familia. It's been great. The relationship with fantasypoints.com has been great. I've met so many great people like Jake in there who've been recurring guests on here, and just people that we use one another as resources. It's just been phenomenal. So I love mi amigo. Thank you so much for joining us today. And Familia, thank you for joining us. And I just want to say one more time, make sure you're giving us a like and subscribe on YouTube, or if you're going to the audio, go to Apple, Google, Spotify. Thank you to Anchor for putting us out there on all those platforms on the audio version. Again, go to fantasypoints.com, use the promo code 22familia10, 22familia10. If you're doing it in Spanish, get that 10% off. They've already slashed the price 25% because more than half the season has come out. You get such great stuff in there, Familia. It's just awesome. I mean, so much great insight and you actually get some great shows that you can get exclusive access to. So just phenomenal there. Again, go to Jorge Martin 17, see my content, familiafbb.com. I'm pushing out articles on this Adentro Afuera, with looking at all the games, the players I'm in and out on. And if I can find some time, I'm going to put together a DFS article. Probably I'll borrow a couple of stats from Jake on there to drop them in there. So but otra vez, to our invitado, muchas gracias, Jake. And to you, everybody, thank you for joining us. And remember, todos somos familia. Salud.